Do closing costs include the down payment? That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked. Honestly, I think the question you're probably asking is, are closing costs in addition to my down payment? But we'll get the answer to both of those questions here shortly. If we've never met before, my name is Gavin Sessions, and if you're curious to learn about all things related to mortgage and home loans, you are in the right place. Subscribe to our channel. We post new content each week. All right, so let's get back to the first question you asked, which is, do closing costs include the down payment? And the short answer to that question is no. Closing costs and the down payment are actually separate things, but when you combine them together, they are what the industry deems your cash to close or your cash due at closing. But hang tight, we'll get to a better explanation of cash to close or cash due at closing just a little bit later. So as I mentioned, the question I think you're probably asking is, are closing costs in addition to my down payment? And the answer to that question is yes, closing costs are in addition to your down payment. So before we get any further, let's just quickly explain what the down payment is and what closing costs are. So we'll start with the down payment. So the down payment is the percentage of the purchase price that you're planning to bring to the transaction with your own money. So let's assume a $400,000 purchase price. And let's also assume that you're gonna bring a 5% down payment. So simple math there, 5% of $400,000 is $20,000, meaning you're planning to bring a $20,000 down payment to this transaction. Now to calculate our loan amount, we simply subtract the $20,000 down payment from the $400,000 purchase price, and we end up with a loan amount of $380,000. Another thing worth mentioning here quickly is something called earnest money, and that's because we get the question all the time, how does earnest money relate to my down payment? Well, I'm glad you asked. Earnest money is absolutely related to your down payment, and it's actually a smaller portion of your down payment. And one of the ways that you make the seller believe that your offer is serious is to give them earnest money. So for example, let's say you write your purchase and sale agreement, you sign it, you submit it to the seller, and you say, hey, I'm gonna give you $5,000 of mine just to confirm that I'm serious about buying your home. So if your offer is accepted, that $5,000 will be placed in escrow, and it's actually part of your $20,000 down payment, right? So if we do the simple math, $20,000 was your original down payment, $15,000 has been given in earnest, that will be credited back to you at closing as part of your down payment, which means the net down payment brought to closing in this case would be $20,000 less $5,000 means $15,000 of additional down payment will be due at closing. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so now that we've got down payment and earnest money out of the way, let's quickly explain closing costs. So closing costs are over and above the property's purchase price that both buyers and sellers incur, and they pay those to third parties to help settle and complete a real estate transaction. So this is certainly not a perfect analogy, but for those of you that live in states where sales tax is a thing, let's say you bought an item for $10, you're not gonna pay just $10, you'll pay $10 plus sales tax. So hopefully that makes sense. So the $10 goes to the person that was selling the item or the store or the dealer or whatever. And then the sales tax is collected and actually given to a third party, in this case, the government. Similar to closing costs, right? The seller sells a home for a price. The closing costs are paid to a third party at closing above and beyond the home's purchase price. So hopefully that makes sense. Meanwhile, our friends in Alaska, New Hampshire, Delaware, Montana, and Oregon are all scratching their heads wondering what the heck we're talking about. So I digress. Just want to pause the video for a quick moment and invite you to connect with us. If you're ready to take the next step to get qualified and speak to a mortgage professional, a loan officer, or if you'd like to get connected to a great real estate agent, click the links below. So you might be saying, hey, I'm planning to buy a home with cash. Well, this is a good time for us to note that yes, even if you're buying a home with cash, you're gonna have some closing costs, but you will have less closing costs, right? So closing costs with a loan, slightly more than closing costs when buying a home with cash. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so let's just briefly list out some of the closing costs that you'll see on your settlement statement from title or your closing disclosure from your loan package. So you're gonna see things like origination fees for processing and underwriting, credit report fees, appraisal fees, discount points to secure a lower interest rate. You'll see title fees such as title insurance and the closing escrow fee. You're gonna see recording fees. You'll see prepaid insurance. You'll see some prepaid interest as well. You'll also see some taxes and insurance reserves to help build your escrow account to pay that homeowner's insurance renewal next year or to pay your property taxes when those come due. All right, so let's loosely calculate what we talked about earlier called cash to close or cash due at closing. So we mentioned that cash to close is basically your down payment plus your closing costs. All right, so if we go back to our example of a $400,000 purchase price with a 5% down payment, and remember that we've already put $5,000 on the line as our earnest money, so therefore we have about $15,000 left of our down payment that we need to bring to closing. Let's also make the assumption that our closing costs, we just talked through those line items just a second ago, equal about $7,500, right? So if we have $15,000 of our down payment still due, plus $7,500 of closing costs due, our simple math of cash due at closing or cash to close is $22,500. So hopefully that makes sense. So if you're curious to learn more about closing costs, we suggest you watch this video titled "What Are Closing Costs?" We go line by line through a closing disclosure and explain everything in exhaustive detail. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next video.